So I was just finding some information. Yeah, this is a. I'll see if I can get the website up. Add another tab. I'm not sure if I can get this website up. Educateself.org, basically. I might just have to open a new tab. Right, I don't know if it's going to come up. The military mailbs also is reference to this, but I wanted to focus on this guy. So, let's see if I can find it. And the guy in the audio, I'm going to play the background. I shall find it in a moment. Well, I just said, but I didn't even know the international website, an international list on the dark web of target individuals details I was sharing. And on split end times I got a strike. So I didn't even know about that, yet individuals being targeted are having that done to them offline as well as online. Yeah, I only share something that's knowledgeable, but of course Google Inc. Corporation AI systems took it straight down. And when I reviewed the contents, didn't even realise, did I, that it was showing GDPR data protection issues of other target individuals, but yet it's on a website I won't mention about, not going to promote it. And when I went into Wikipedia of that website, the history of it, I'm not surprised. So Google Links trying to keep people safe that way, aren't they? Because you just don't know these days. Right, this guy I'm looking for, I did find it the other day, but I'm going to dig deep online. Again, it's reference to the implants. The time travel, yeah, I was listening to the podcast earlier. Just got to find his name. Oh, here we go, I found it. It's AIBIELE. I'm going to screen share this name because it's relevant to the Philadelphia Monarch program. The excellent, I'm going to show where you can also listen to the audio. So I'm going to screen share. I'm going to play this in the background. I don't know if the sound will pick up because my laptop is always being hacked into. Right. No, that one. Right. So this is the website. It's actually this is an excellent interview, and it goes to what he knows about the history of 19 a very informative video on mind control. You see, this It just relates to what's going on in the world now. There's already many articles that says about this guy on the internet, and we'll repost some of those articles. You see, there's a very old interview, and I'm going to show you where to go and find it if I can. The life of this individual being teleported to the year. You see, this is advanced technology. You just think it's just like a sci-fi movie. This guy already found out that he cannot and will not be arrested by the police when he was taken to custody after being discovered on the Monarch base in the early 90s. One of the more compelling revelations of the private talk of this individual from his 8-hour video autobiography reference to being teleported to the year, get this, 2137, after jumping off the Navy ship ELDRIDGE on August the 12th, 1943, with his brother Duncan Cameron, as the Philadelphia experiment began to spin out of control. If anybody's ever heard of that. On board the ship, AI and his brother found themselves in the future hospital in the year 2137. The hospital personnel and other people with whom he spoke told AI of his great changes and class CATCHLYSMIC events that occurred in the opening years of the 21st century. Wow. So I want to see if you see the Internet of Things will block. But let me just go in to find the audio. Nope. No, I don't know. I can find it now. I think I have to go into my playlist on this channel, which I'm going to try and screen share to go and watch it. And it's up to the individual to take what you want. Right. I add to this. Let me just check. It's right, and there's another guy. I'll just find him too. They mentioned someone else. Let's have a look. Right, with very informative video mind control. Right, let me see if I can find that, if it's on here. No, they're blocking me. They're blocking me linking, clicking on the link. Right, it was made in 1992, the video, conversation with videos, and most of the material on the TER-ZISKI videos have not appeared in text on the internet. I also laid out the details of the Philadelphia experiment in the book, Philadelphia Experiment of Other UFOs Conspiracies, co-authored Brad Stinger, 1990s. So I've got to try and find the audio interview this way. It should be in playlist, but I'm gonna have to go into my history to find it. I think it would be easier. It might be here. Yes, it is. Right. I'm just gonna try and stop this. I'm being hacked, so bear with me. Right. this very long interview. Okay, I made it, but I don't. Okay, this is quite. There's 3 videos on this guy's channel, and this first one, second one's important. Right, Richard Bruce YouTube channel. What's the date on this one? It is not made up. So this is what it's titled. So he's uploaded it. He's found it, and he's uploaded it. So there's 2 videos. I don't know if there's a first video being targeted, and the part. Okay, well, these are the non-human subjects it goes on to. So let me just check if I'm sharing that. Quite right. I hacked it into everything right now. Well, I won't share it. I should just play the audio.
Between the two of them, there is a fishing pole standing there fishing with nobody hanging onto it, quite invisible, hands holding it up. This is rather a famous picture, and it is.
Nobody knows that. They surely didn't tell you that's where they got their image from.
I'm being hacked into
Nobody knows it.
it.
It's changing to that. It's control.
Has rather good control over this sort of thing. It's not about but real. Yeah, this is the famous picture. Right.
Picture, and we see
Yeah, you see the president on the right in his pink shirt, Secret Service man on the left with his arms crossed, and fishing pole standing there all by
And
itself.
the word of God will tell you why.
Stop.
Okay. They got different in them, and they're in trouble.
Splash marks around invisible feet, right between the two. Yes, right there. The angle seems a little bit off in terms of the way the poles are fishing, but we don't have the full picture of exactly what bay they're in or where this was and exactly where their lines were actually anchored. For this, I don't want two techniques. One, hardware, or the second one I understand is they can put the human, that is the Secret Service man, through a special processing where without hardware he becomes invisible for about 72 hours. And then he starts to do the invisible man number and start to come back into visibility. And also he gets, I understand, violently ill in the process of back to, quote, normalcy, unquote. Either way, they have control over processes of invisibility.
Hangover.
You might have a very powerful invisible hangover, and the hangover is not invisible to the person who has to withstand it. This is only one of the aspects of many things which have occurred.
One very interesting thing here that comes to my attention is that if all carriers and if all planes are equipped with this invisibility, which basically is also a teleportation technique, then practically all confrontation on this planet become impossible. Because the fact that we can off around the world it will just flipping the number.
Flipping the dials and showing up somewhere else. If it's running on the invisibility. Fleet going invisible in the Pacific, off radar, off optical view by private aircraft that could be flying in the area. And the fleet shows up a day later, a couple of thousand miles away, and beaming under completely normal conditions where it doesn't feel like anything has happened. So that changed location. In the meantime, they were totally off full radar, not visible, and could not be tracked in that period of time. They made a quick jump of some type, and we're there. How do you explain this to the sailors? I don't know. How do you explain to the personnel on board the ship that are not in on the equipment? Because these big carrier ship, everybody does not know about the equipment. Only a handful of persons know, including, of course.
Maybe this film, the final countdown, gives an idea of how this is explained. They simply said that it was a whirlwind, a cyclone with some time-changing characteristics that moved the ship back in time to the Pearl Harbor attack.
Yes, that film purported to be fictional, and they got away with it, you might say, by showing it as a freak of nature. Nature does not engage in those kind of freaks, not so far as we know at any time. My information was that it was a real test. They had the equipment on board. It was the NIST, and they were the first ones to be so equipped. And they went back into the past on direct orders to the day before Pearl Harbor with the intent of whoever gave the orders that the aircraft on the Nimitz would wipe out the invading Japanese fleet before there was an attack and prevent the attack, thereby change history. Well, as I showed in the movie, one of the civilian observers along, was arguing with the captain. He says, "Do you want to play God and change your history?" He says, "If you do," he says, "you don't know how many people will be living who might otherwise have died in the attack, and you will change the whole structure, as it were, of our history and the possible outcome of the war." And nonetheless, in the actual movie, the skipper did not want. He started to do that. And the natural phenomena closed in on him, and the attack was canceled. Back in the plane, like 40 feet, curved off the attack, pulled the hangs back, and turned the ship to come.
So basically, I mean, all these idea that whole there is never anything wrong again. Like tremendous amount of funding like projects. Because I mean most superpowers are armed with these advanced technology. You cannot literally fight the war, or you can destroy the whole planet. But my important point is what they think about the recent revelation in so many places that basically this whole war has been a very clever arrangement between the two superpowers that have been transferring technology behind the scenes.
Are you referring to World War II? Or
after that.
As far as World War II is concerned, I would say yes. There was a great deal of covert transfer of technology, not just before, but during the war. Before the war was not covert. During the war it was covert, and after we seized everything because Nazi Germany surrendered. That is, the Nazi group surrendered Germany. They did not surrender, period. The Nazis never surrendered, which is one of the best kept secrets of history. They merely moved out of Germany and went to Antarctica. They took all their best projects and got away with them. But insofar as the covert technology transfer is concerned, there's a great deal of evidence that there was a continuing covert transfer of personnel. My father was in on some of this smuggling of people out of Germany to the U.S. during the early part of World War II. And with it, some of the technology. Of course, the Germans developed their own time machine in 1945. We developed the equivalent of it with the Philadelphia experiment in 43, and an actual one in 44.
Projects have been coordinated from a higher level so that they are not to which one to do it better.
That would be true, except for the fact the Germans had no instability project. No evidence they had one of any kind, but there is some partial evidence to the effect that there may have been an attempt by Nazi sympathizers to steal the Eldridge in the final test and take it out to sea and turn it over to the Germans.
Or maybe it may have been an attempt by the American power elite to transfer this technology to Germany, as there have been many such cases in history of transferring super technologies to Russia, both the Second World War, during the Second World War, after the Second World War, in order to boost up Germany's resistance.
Possibly true. The problem with that is, however, that while at some higher level there was covert cooperation, and during the war, of course, there was a great deal of cooperation between the U.S. and the USSR, and they were given, literally, some 25 pounds of purified uranium before the war was over. The Russians were, and that was the material which was eventually used to develop the first atomic bomb in 1949. But this type of cooperation there was between allies, between Germany and the United States. There was a different story. You had financial interests and industrial interests who were so heavily entrenched in the world's financial structure and in the industrial structure that there were deliberate orders out that there were certain bomb targets in Germany that you did not bomb. And they're not talking about the concentration camps that did not bomb, but the actual industrial targets which were immune from being bombed throughout the war. The question is why? And who gave those orders? Obviously, they didn't come from the Germans. They didn't come from Eisenhower. They didn't come from anyone in Germany or Italy or England. They came from some level above. Where, I don't know.
For the case of the German ball bearing that was tripled, that there's plastic stamps and used in American machine, or high-grade American aviation gasoline ship in American ships with German fuel to Germany for the Luftwaffe.
Well, that part I didn't hear about until very, very recently. But that is another example of the type of undercover cooperation due to industrial interests to keep the war going. And yes, there was definitely covert cooperation at military levels, which the public didn't know about and most of the military didn't know about. We also have a fine example of the Germans developing jet aircraft in 1939, operational. They had jet fighter aircraft and two-engine fighter craft and jet bombers by 1941-42. And rockets 43, which were ready to go in production in 41. And this was before the British ever heard about a jet engine. In fact, they only heard about it because the Germans were building them. And they probably captured one. And at that point, they tried to replicate it. They couldn't. They went to a different design, which was grossly inferior to the British design that was changed much later. But they did not have the correct design. The Americans understand it, proceeded with the design very much according to the original German designs.
Yes, where did they get the...
I couldn't imagine. Much of this sort of thing went on. You also had, in terms of some of the more bizarre projects, you had attempts in Germany which were becoming quite successful at mind modification, not strict mind control, but mind modification in terms of indoctrination, which was used by the SS masters to indoctrinate the SS troops in the special rooms where they were being pinged by 27 kilohertz high frequency energy off the special loudspeaker systems, which hit them in the rear of the head.
I would like to add a little comment here on the transfer of technology, and then we will turn to mind control. It's very interesting to notice, according to a study by an American professor from a major Ivy League university, I think it was a Princeton University professor, that studied Russian armaments industry from the 20s all the way to the 50s. And in his monumental academic work, he, among other things, he noticed that 14 out of the 15 munition plants in Germany at the start of the Second World War were in Russia. 14 out of the 15 munition plants in Russia were built by German technology, German money, expertise, know-how, engineers, and management. And even to these days, the AK-47, the Kalashnikov submachine gun, fires with bullets that are the original German Mannlicher bullets for the rifle the Germans had during the First World War. So basically, the Russians fought the whole Second World War with munition produced in German munition plants. After the war, I've heard stories that, for example, Rolls-Royce sold a whole factory for jet engines to Russia because the Russians were way behind, even behind the British, and the British were behind the Germans. Just in time for the Korean War. So the whole Korean War was fought with big planes that had their engines built in a factory somewhere in Russia that was delivered by Rolls-Royce. Later on, I've got stories about the whole nuclear submarine being to the Russians secretly in the 70s to boost up their submarine fleet because they were lagging pretty much behind. And so this Cold War confrontation was not very real. Everybody in the Pentagon knew that the Russians are behind in submarine production, so funding could not be appropriated by Congress for new construction. Or way back in the late 40s when the Russian ambassador stole a nuclear warhead, a nuclear bomb, and smuggled it out of Washington in his suitcase and onto the plane. All these things do not happen by coincidence or through sheer geniusness of the Russian secret services. They are cleverly orchestrated and arranged on a higher level, conspiratorial level, higher than the leadership of the CIA or the KGB, in order to coordinate this Cold War and to have the two adversaries basically equally strong so that money could continue to be appropriated by both the American Congress and the Supreme Soviet. And this has been going on for all these years. My personal feeling is that behind the scenes, a massive space program of the two superpowers with the cooperation and participation of other countries is being going on. And what we see in Star Trek as a fictional reality is probably a Monday, everyday, 9 to 5 jobs for a limited select group of elite intelligence personnel and elite scientists in both Russia and the United States. But I would like to have you all discuss a little bit more about the German mind control project and how they were later carried on in the United States.
Okay, the initial work that I know of that was carried on by the Germans involved the use of sound techniques, which produced a semi-hypnotic effect on the person's groups in the SS being indoctrinated, so that the indoctrination training would take more readily. This equipment at the end of World War II was captured by what they call the Book Rogers flying teams in all over Russia and Germany looking for new technology, things they wanted to bring home to the United States. Quite aside from the 30 railroad cars full of patents and paperwork going back to the U.S., they found all kinds of little interesting pieces of hardware. One of them was this indoctrination hardware, which wound up in Los Angeles, went to the Technicolor Corporation to replicate the electronics, and the speakers wound up without Project Lansing to be duplicated. I know this because of a certain friend of mine who was involved in the project at some level at the time. And after they analyzed what had been built and how it worked on the human head, the hardware was replicated and went into production, and nobody knows where it went. But it was used, of course, in the U.S. somewhere. Exactly where is an unknown at this point. The other factors that go on is, of course, the Germans started this. The Japanese also had their own program going using a totally different approach. They were using microwave energy, a special technique working on the head. I do not know how successful they might have been, but the project was taken over by the U.S. at the end of the war and swept totally under the rug with complete silence. The work continued, basically, at Brookhaven National Laboratory, starting about 1947. And there they had already in place, smuggled across the ocean from Germany, a considerable number of refugee German Jewish scientists. And they were part of the mind control project and certain other projects. They went to work in Brookhaven being a national laboratory, to work on the continuation of mind control techniques. Since Brookhaven is a national laboratory, it is funded by tax funds, federal funds. They therefore have to make a report every month as to what they're doing, all the projects underway, and a general report of progress, lack thereof, or whatever. And this went on for some 20 years. And then after approximately 20 years, or close to that, somebody in Congress decides to start doing these reports. So just stuffing them in some cubbyhole, they started reading them, found out about mind control. At that point, somebody in Congress blew their lid, said, "What, mind control? If they're building this sort of stuff, they might use it on us. Cancel the project." The project was canceled, and the scientists were thrown out of Brookhaven. They were looking, of course, for a new home to continue their research, and they found it not far from Brookhaven, which was a location called Montauk area. An army base or from some of these other drugs, and they were then, at that point, wide open usage. There was no control on them in the 30s in the U.S. or elsewhere, to my knowledge. The controls on these were only established after World War II and would not come down as a tight, hard control with the controlled substance laws we now have until 1965. It was that late. That, of course, included LSD and many of the other mind-bending drugs. Cocaine was not in that category. These people used it regularly as an energy booster and to sharpen their wits, their mentality, and possibly meditation. Definitely some of these compounds, particularly peyote, as one example. LSD is a synthetic, but peyote was a natural derivative from the peyote mushroom. Was definitely used and still is used by the American Indians as part of their rites, but it has been used by many people experimentally in the past as a means for expanding the human consciousness and looking into other areas beyond the normal physical reality. The government couldn't have this for one simple reason. They were interfering with the CIA's MK Ultra program and certain other programs the CIA was involved with, which involved mind manipulation. And if you get somebody with an expanded mind, with more awareness and more understanding, you'll be able to see through these other programs. But if you cut off the means, right, if you cut off the use of these materials or their availability, then you're not going to be able to take a better look around you. You might not be able to find out that your mind has been tampered with on one of the government projects, which were rampant in the U.S. and Canada. In Canada, from the CIA, from the late 40s onward, as basically the chemical drug aspects from the early to mid 50s. And MK Ultra was only one program, there were many others. You also had other programs underway, which started in 47, went on through 52, for finding the basis for changing the memory structure, changing the personality, completely and totally if the CIA or whatever agency wanted to do this. And these programs were instituted by Dr. Wilhelm Reich in Rangeley, Maine, in 1947, when he signed a 5-year contract with the CIA to do research, which was, according to what he was given to understand at the beginning, the initial point, the CIA was, quote, interested in two aspects. One was development of psychic ability, learning it means to improve or enhance psychic ability. The second part was they wanted to find a means to deprogram people who had been programmed. Well, they didn't state that to Reich, but he soon found out that's what they wanted. And he blew his stack and falsified the experiments. Right. He found basically the means whereby you can totally reprogram the human mind that will and change its structure, its intent, the memory patterns, the memory functions, commands being built in to control that individual so they were no longer a free agent, even though it might be under the impression they were. Certain command methods could be used to have that pre-programmed person on command do something which had already been programmed into them by CIA, NSA, or whoever was using these techniques. This was all part of the mind control programs of the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. And this stems from basically German work and from some Japanese work. The Japanese work comes in to picture later and say on with using RF techniques, microwave, and satellites. But this required a great deal more research in between after the beginning programs of the 40s and 50s. Wilhelm Reich threatened to expose the whole business to the public, and he was then hauled into he attempted to haul him to court once in 1954. He refused to show when he got away with it. He sent a letter to the judge. But he was inherently unhappy with what he had been used for and said he would never work for the CIA again. In fact, all of his lab personnel were armed to the teeth to keep out one particular government agency, and that was the FDA. If the FDA personnel ever showed up on any of his lab property, orders were to other government agencies cooperated by.
It was very interesting for me, the connection that you were discussing between some certain impersonation techniques by Indian yogi, that's what they
this had nothing to do with yoga practices. This was a direct offshoot from the Wilhelm Reich techniques and Wilhelm Reich's research. Basically, I will not go into the whole 9 yards of it on camera, but basically what Reich discovered in a 5-year period from 47 to 52 was that there was a great relationship between the mental functioning of the human and sex in the orgastic state, as he called it, and that he found that in the orgastic state, if you could hold that point where the person was about ready to have an orgasm, but not have the orgasm, you were held at a peak point of nervous excitation. At that point, the human subconscious and the human conscious lock together in an open line. And everything that's in the subconscious becomes available to the conscious mind.
The soul connects to the mind.
Right. Therefore, you can reprogram that person if you know what you're doing. Right. Found out partially how it can be done in the CIA after many years of work, and the NSA found out how you can complete this so that a person could be programmed with certain inbuilt mechanisms, functions, memories, change memories, whatever. And while the initial techniques were more physical, after sometime in the 70s, they developed purely electronic techniques which would induce the orgastic state and hold it electronically. And these pieces of equipment are in every hospital in the United States which accepts federal funding by law. It requires a double floppy disk in the computer. One is a standard floppy because they use these equipments normally for EEG measurement or shock therapy if they need to use shock therapy in the psychiatric wards. But with the addition of a special second floppy, which goes into a portion which is normally locked, this is the so-called orgastic floppy, which induces that state in the person who is wired up to this equipment, which now is not with big pads, but very tiny little probes, which are 50 millimeters square. And at certain appropriate points of the body, they are attached to one of the body and very critical nerve ganglia points. That person is pushed and thrown in, if you will, into the orgastic state, and then by computer, they can change that person's mind, memory, programming, whatever. When they're done, shut it off and install a final command that they don't remember anything that's happened. And then, of course, the person is released. No drugs. No messy techniques of the earlier Reichian form, and they can be done to a patient, whether it's a regular patient or an in-outpatient, at any institution in the U.S. that has its equipment. Private hospitals are not accepting federal funding, do not have a law requirement to carry such equipment, but it is recommended that they do. But every major hospital that has federal funding has required the law to have at least one of these machines there, and they're usually kept in a state lock and key. This is how far some of the programming techniques are going in this country. This is only one example. A friend of mine who worked in one of the hospitals upstate New York has personally seen the equipment. And he didn't say he had seen it in operation, but I think probably he has. And he knows exactly how it works and exactly what is done to make it function, and that it can be used for those purposes. This took many years of research after Wilhelm Reich. Of course, Reich died in 1957 in prison after he refused to reveal what classified government work he was working on in early 57. And the judge said his hands were tied. He had no choice but to commit him to prison unless he could show good cause why he should not, which meant he had to talk about his classified work. He says, I can't. So he went to prison and died there. And of course came the famous FDA book burning of Wilhelm Reich's works. They went around and literally confiscated thousands of Reich books, and in a particularly vicious form of Nazi book burning, one had burned the books. These have been republished since, most of them. I think there are a few that are still out of print now privately. They didn't get all of them in bookstores, in the places where they were normally purchased. It was a form of Orwellian blacklisting. Right. He was showing in all of his published works, which was not only his journals, his Journal of Orgonomy, but all of the various magazines, the books he had written and published, which were many, about a dozen. They were showing the function of orgone energy, not only in terms of the human body, but in terms of the atmosphere, weather control, smog, the relationships of smoggy conditions in the Earth's atmosphere, how it was related to the loss of orgone energy in the atmosphere, and so forth. And, yes, that's very true. Radiosondes, as they call them. And these radiosondes, believe it or not, were designed initially and built in redwood form by Wildenreich in Maine. And they were shipped down to that neat little laboratory in Long Island called Brookhaven. And there they were beaten into production forms, and that's how they could produce them by the thousand, fairly inexpensively. And they did. You know, Preston bought maybe the entire stock in the United States surplus because they were banned at a certain point in time from being used. And the government didn't want the secret out that they were modifying the weather, not measuring it, because ground receiving stations were not built. Or they built as the transmitter. So what do you do with the transmitter if you have no receiver? Well, you're doing something else. And they were. They were modifying the weather on an experimental basis. And the bigger units were capable of steering hurricanes. The AMT-6 started out with a little box, an AMT-2, then a slightly larger one with a white plate. Bubble on the top, shaped with a point and a round section. And this AMT-4 was a little more powerful. And you use that as a more advanced form of weather control. This was the earliest model, the AMT-2, which comprised of this white portion. It had the same antenna in it. It was run by a battery pack. And the rest of it was a different kind of a box structure, which contained some elements. The three sensing elements. One was barometric pressure, and the other was a special state which actually sensed the amount of orgone energy in the atmosphere and converted it to an electrical signal. The other one sensed the amount of your energy, which is considered a disintegrant orgone energy in the atmosphere, sensed that and gave it an electrical equivalent, and then went through a spectral modulator chopper system that was fed up in the transmitter, that small unit being one of the first ones, rather low power, which would then modify the weather experimentally in a limited area. They went from smaller to bigger boxes and finally to the big AMT-6, which in its final form, which you can hardly find anymore, was in a cylindrical tube, stood about this high off that diameter, and the antenna was deployed after it was in flight, so to speak. The large ones were taken off the plane and dropped off parachute. The smaller units went up in a balloon.
So basically, this is a manipulation of a micro and a macro, from the mind to the weather.
Yes.
But to summarize here, so basically the Germans developed mind control through chemotherapy and hypnosis.
Correct. And they used very heavily scopolamine and other chemicals, but scopolamine was their principal weapon for hypnosis and mind bending, if you will. And it was used very effectively with hypnosis to change your mind and do a programming of the chemical means.
And later on, because not only the rocket scientists, German rocket scientists got shared by the Allied powers after the Second World War, but so were all other secret scientists, so were their SS specialists, Gestapo, propaganda ministry specialists that were shared by the Allied powers. And obviously all of these mind control experiments were moved and continued in the other countries. Here in the United States, I've read a lot of books about parapsychology development in the Soviet Union. In Russia, of course, the other goes wrong. One would read about such advanced technologies developed in the United States. But obviously, they were developed everywhere.
In all major countries.
Yeah. And so here, on top of the chemotherapy and hypnosis, obviously in the United States were developed the other two methods, namely with quantum microchips and with some microwave radiation.
Yes, the earlier form of electrical stimulation using orgone Reichian techniques was one. Then they came to another technique under the more advanced mind control techniques, which that was discovered by Preston Nichols sometime in the 80s. He found out about the other technique they were using, which was used and implemented at Montauk, Phoenix Project. It consisted of a more or less standard low-powered radio transmitter. He replicated the whole system as an experimental test. He took a 250 watt surplus radio transmitter operating at high frequency range, which says between 3 and 30 megahertz. Designed a special modulator for it, and then had a tape recorder, which had a tape recorded on it, which said, in essence, quote, anyone hearing this message will call such and such phone number. And that phone number happened to be a Long Island phone number in the home of a friend of Preston's. We didn't use his number. Now, the criteria of this thing was none of the victims were you have and did have a radio receiver. What they were doing was broadcasting second order energy, which the human mind picks up and decodes directly. As if you had a radio receiver. The human mind does have a radio receiver operating at second order frequencies. Basically a telepathic type receiver. And you can make it work just as well with an RF transmitter or radio transmitter if you know how to do the proper modulation on it. Because what you're doing with a tube type transmitter is you are already emitting not only ordinary electromagnetic waves, which is first order, but secondary, fourth order. And there's not built to the vacuum tube, but do not built to solid state. Correct. And what they did, turn this thing on and let it run for maybe 8 hours a day for about 3 days. He wanted to find out, Preston wanted to find out if this technique was valid, i.e. would people hear it in their heads. They did. They had a tape recorder, automatic answering machine tied to his friend's phone number for about 3 days. They received over 600 phone calls from all parts of the eastern seaboard of the United States as far away as Florida. They finally went through them all and found that there was actually about 200 separate individuals. Someone called several times because this message was on the air about 3 days. It stopped them because of the fact that somebody in the government found out what they were doing, located the transmitter, which is no problem with the FCC, with all of their plans, and pulled off the transmitter. Next thing that happens, the tapes are recorded and the telephone system disappeared. And then sometime after that, the gentleman who let it home to use for this little experiment disappeared himself. But he proved the point. You can program a person, condition them in such a manner that from a specialized radio transmitter, they can receive the signal directly without having to carry a little box in their pocket. The only box they need is a working brain up here. They'll pick up the signal and decode it. And if they're already preconditioned, this is the key, they must be preconditioned by whatever programming is put in. They're preconditioned to hear this signal. You see, everybody is calling it. Only people who've been preconditioned. They hear the signal, they go up to the phone, they call whatever number they're supposed to call, and then what can happen from that point is, which did not happen in this case, but what can happen is that some respondent, whether it be a machine or a person on the other end, will provide a secondary trigger which will untrigger the whole program, which this person has buried in them. And then they become the robot, the automaton, whatever to do whatever they're doing, like mass killers, schoolyards, or on the tops of the Belfry Tower at UFC Berkeley. He was a famous case there where this guy went up there, gunman went up there with a rifle and shot about 15 people. Good well then. And you have the famous case of Sirhan killing Jack Kennedy. He shot wildly. He hit Kennedy with one bullet, but it was proven forensically that the bullet that killed Kennedy never came from Sirhan's gun. It came from somebody behind Kennedy, firing from less than 3 inches from behind his right ear. And that man was, of course, one of the guards. He was a substitute that day for the regular guard. They planned these very carefully. But then they have to have a patsy. So Sirhan was the patsy. He was accused, he was tried, he was convicted, and went off to prison. He probably never did any severe damage to him at all. Then you have, of course, the more famous case of John F. Kennedy, where they said a single gunman, single bullet theory, which has been so thoroughly exploded in recent years. There were at least 3 assassins. Some of the films show it, and some of the private photos show it. And of course, poor little Mr. Oswald, ex-CIA agent, was the patsy, and they sacrificed him for a police setup to call him the gunman. If that wasn't enough, of course, the basement of the police station in Dallas, Mr. Jack Ruby runs forward and pulls the trigger and shoots Mr. Oswald on national television. He didn't die then either, by the way. He died on the operating table later. They made sure he was dead on the operating table. And he said himself that his Oswald didn't kill anybody. He never pulled the trigger. He wasn't even on the 5th floor. And that shows very clearly in the movies. These kind of mind manipulation techniques are everywhere. The problem is you don't know who is pulling them or what they intend to do with them or how far they intend to go.
What would you comment on the implantation of microchips into the human brain for the purposes of listening to the sounds around the person, maybe even getting visual signal from what the person sees, to from one point on turning the big master switch and assuming control over that being and actually commanding it what to do. In one of last year's issues of the Mutual UFO Network journal, the UFO journal, there was a very good article of about maybe 24 papers in official academic medical journals about implantation of microchips into pets and human beings, human brains, for the purpose of mind control. Some of these papers were from the early 60s, which means that more than 30 years of such research has been going on. This is a topic very important in the field of ufology, with all this mind implantation by the little grays going on. And it has been my suspicion all along that many of these techniques have been in the arsenal of the government, and so one should look first of all into his own government and then into some aliens doing this massive implantation. Rumors are that from 1 in 40 all the way up to 1 in 10 from the United States population have been implanted.
Well, if you go into the history of this type of mind control by signal, by internal control, you go back as early as 1960 when Dr. Delgado was experimenting with implanted chips in the heads of bulls, and he proved in Ring in Spain, I think Barcelona, that a charging bull could be stopped in its tracks by flipping a switch on a little electronic control box on the radio transmitter, which affected this chip buried in the bull's head. The bull,
like a radio control model.
similar to a radio control model, except he was doing a very simple signal transmission, which caused the bull to turn aside, and it was set in some manner, which made a very effective control of the bull. He lost his anchor, or he was just directed to turn aside. It was publicly demonstrated, and that was only the beginning. Nobody has been able to find out exactly what Delgado did since then, but of course, you have the spectacle of the CIA continuing, and as microchips were produced, you have had implants which have been found in people's heads by the proper high definition, not radar, but X-ray systems, and also the MRW systems, or MNI. They can also find these chips. But you have more than one class. The initial class was probably developed by our government, possibly in conjunction with alien technology, and possibly strictly on their own. But then you have certain documentary films, which the Japanese have produced, showing after interview of people and putting them through CAT scans, they can show implanted devices directly in the brain. They cannot figure out how they got there, and they know they are blessed as well. They can never remove them because it would kill the person to try and take these things out of the brain. They cannot explain how they got there. They cannot understand the technology involved because it's not terrestrial technology. It's one of the proofs about UFOs and ETs. Some of these implanted devices defy any medical skill we have to put in the head where they are.
Maybe they could be
It's hard to say how it was done. It's hard to say how it might have been done. But they're there. They're easily visible. In layer by layer CAT scan into what part of the brains are in, and very often they find two of them, one on the left lobe, one on the right lobe. What effect they have is unknown, because it's not been detected in some of these cases that the individuals had particularly erratic behavior. But the technology is there and the technique is there, and where the line ends between U.S. government hardware and control and alien technology and control is very hard to say. But this is, the evidence is they're working together. They're working together. Exactly. Going to the Phoenix project, one of the aspects there, of course, was mentioned the radio device, radio transmitter for human people. Brains properly set up will pick up the signal and respond. You have other types of technology which are being developed as a result of the continuing work at Phoenix, at Montauk, elsewhere. Because you must also know that there were 25 stations, every stage station converted essentially to a Montauk type operation. So they didn't all stay online. Actually, only about 3 left. And how many other projects buried elsewhere are going on? We don't really know. We know of 2. ITT Corporation, who was the contractor for all of the hardware for Montauk, that was for the Phoenix project at Montauk. We also had some ongoing side projects. Brentwood, Long Island, existed for many years, actually since sometime after the turn of the century, an overseas communication system known as the K Radio Overseas Communications. About 1966, the system was brought out by ITT. No, those were standard, ordinary communication using regular transmitters. Only they had a bank of about 52 transmitters there for different frequencies that were set up for continuing overseas communication, which was voice, teletype, fax, and everything imaginable, both black and white and color fax. The transmitter side was at Brentwood, and after it was shut down, which was in the fall of '86 when I was there on the island, we went through there and found that they had been experimenting on other projects on the side, and some of the transmitters had some non-standard equipment in them. We found other non-standard equipment around, and we finally located the chief engineer of the site, who admitted that there were major changes in installation, which he had no understanding of what they were for. They had the regular traffic, and they had direct tie-ins to ITT laboratories in Nutley, New Jersey, through dedicated phone lines direct to that site for inputs that he had no idea what they were. So it was totally controlled from ITT Nutley. Could well have been. Now they had a parallel project going on in certain other aspects. A transmitter site and a receiving site. The receiving site was not on the same location. They moved it about 30 miles away to Southampton, Long Island. And there they had the gigantic receiver site, which is still essentially there. The transmitter site was demolished and converted into a industrial park, which is all you see now, an industrial park from about 87 onward. But in that site, some strange things went on, and the story of how the project came down is even stranger. Might be worth noting. We had to track down Preston Nichols, who's very heavy in this because he's a radio amateur and he's in the radio amateur club. And he had been by that place many times. One October night, he, Duncan, and myself in his van, headed up to the place. He wanted to show me this vast transmitter site. He says, I don't think we can get on in there, but it's there. Well, the gates were wide open. The guards were gone. Power was off. So we drove in and drove around and wandered all through the place. And they had not yet started demolishing the main transmitter building. They had demolished some of the smaller buildings peripherally, which may have had some manufacturing facilities. We're not sure. But we went through that, saw all the transmitters, and there were some very strange charges left on. Eventually, of course, the amateurs were invited in to strip the place, take anything they wanted, because it would save the contractor the trouble of removing it. The amateurs had a towers, 120 feet high with the rotating antennas. They saved the antennas. They took everything you can imagine. When they were done, they still had literally dozens of hardware to scrap. About a very strange occurrence in one night in September, actually Saturday. ITT had planned to shut this facility down on a permanent basis because they really had a little more use for it. And that particular morning on a Saturday, they gave instructions by phone to the station master that this was to be the last day of transmission. There'd be some traffic that come through, and they would have shut down the transmitter on a permanent basis. So he received his orders, and throughout the rest of the day and far into the night, the transmitter remained on. And was receiving traffic, and nobody at the Nutland or New York could figure out what was going on. They had orders to shut down the station, and it was not shut down. It was accepting traffic and transmitting. So they sent somebody out from New York to investigate. He arrived that night and started to go on base, took one look and said, I ain't going on this place. The transmitter building with all of the transmitters, which was quite a large structure, was glowing with a blue glow over it. Something which was totally abnormal. He wouldn't walk on the base. The whole was surrounded with PhD fencing and all of this. He wouldn't go on the base at all. He went to a telephone and called Nutley and said, there's something very strange going on here. I refuse to set foot on base because of this very weird blue glow, and it just doesn't seem normal at all. Attempts from Nutley to contact any of the personnel on the base in the latter part of the afternoon, the early evening, futilely, had no answers on the phone. So they said, okay, don't go on base. We'll come by with the crew in the morning and shut down the power from the substation outside the operating area, which they did. And then they went on base. Nothing wrong, everything appearing perfectly normal. All the equipment was there. 12 people on that base earlier in the day had vanished completely, were never found. Not a trace. I finally had to tell the families of these people that disappeared. How they handled it, I don't know. But about 3 days later, they fired up the equipment to see if there's anything wrong with it. They found nothing wrong with it, whatever. Every piece of equipment on that base operated properly, but nobody was there. So ITT shuts down and a little head scratching finally says, okay, we don't have anything more to do with this place, get rid of it. So that was when the order came. They found somebody who was a developer of industrial properties, brought it lock, stock, and barrel for $5 million cash. They finally found out how much they paid for it. And ITT told him, you get everything. He says, we don't want all this transmitting gear. He says, you got it all. We don't want it. It's your problem. That's where it came, the famous office of the radio amateurs to come in and have at it and take anything they wanted. And they did for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And of course, eventually everything was torn up and transmitters were destroyed. The buildings were leveled. I was there when they were doing it. And the underground facilities were so extensive underground rooms. It was so strong that they supported the bulldozers without bending at all. What they did with that, I don't know. But they eventually cleared everything. It's now a large industrial site. There's no trace of the old transmitter side towers. The buildings on the site. That story was weird in that whatever was going on at that station, apparently the station or something connected with it wasn't about to be shut down. So into the blue went about 12 people. Somewhat amazing what happened in Montauk. But there was a different phenomenon. That's all the strange things that have turned up in Long Island in the process.
This reminds me of the additional byproducts of the Philadelphia. It's almost way back in the 40s when human was doing all these extra elders and then somebody else has another series. Everything in Greek wall. Then the barroom fight against human that came out from nowhere.
Yeah, those are all interesting stories. The one about the barroom fight is documented. I do have the newspaper clipping finally, which documents group sailors coming out of, as they put it in the paper, the rear room of the barroom, fighting and engaging in a brawl and involved themselves customers in the bar, and bar stools were overturned and things were damaged. He estimated $600 worth of damage, which was quite a lot of damage in 1943. And the MPs and the SPs were called, and the police and the shore patrol hauled off the sailors. And Navy said they would repair, pay for the damage that was done. The only problem with the story was there was no back room on the bus, nothing but the wall. It would appear that these sailors came out of the wall, probably connected with the Philadelphia experiment. We don't really know. It's never been run down for the ultimate answer as to where they came from. The other story I've heard once, and I've not been able to get any data on it, is that about the same time, a sailor, an American one, turned up buried in a brick wall someplace in Italy. Quite dead and discovered. The body was kept buried in the brick itself. And this was very reminiscent of the others. The four bodies were buried in the steel, two horizontally on the deck, and two vertically in smoking the walls. So the phenomenon that was created by the Philadelphia experiment, the final test, was enormous. It was very far-reaching and was very, very destructive of many things. And we perhaps do not yet know the full story of what it really did. But we do know that the Navy, of course, wouldn't leave it alone. Eventually had to pick it up again in 47, which I've already outlined. But these were
stories here, a very interesting story that I heard on American radio, American Forces Radio, Japan, the late 70s, about a big rock that was a program on unexplained phenomena, Fortean phenomena. One night, a big rock, a huge boulder appeared out of nowhere in the middle of the city square of an American city on the East Coast. Next morning, all the city elders gathered. The rock was so big they couldn't haul it in a truck. They had to cut it in pieces or dynamite it. Scientists were called in, and one of them said, "Oh, maybe this is a materialization of some material out of a different dimension." And I said, "Nah, different dimension. I left school. That was almost 20 years ago when I have absolutely no idea about time travel, about different parallel dimensions and so on." Yeah, the Fortean phenomena were absolute taboo in Eastern Europe, and still are widely unknown. But the program ended with the words, and the name of this scientist was Albert Einstein, and I clearly remember to this day cold hands crawling down my back because I realized that there may be something more serious to this rather than just a simple joke. Then I remember another story in a science fiction magazine. My personal feeling is that many of the science fiction stories that we read, and even many of the tabloid reports that we read, and that the supermarket checkout lines are daily bombarded with these messages. I'm subscribed to the tabloid papers. The Weekly World News is my favorite one. My feeling is that this is a very subtle way of manipulation and of education of the whole society. It works on a principle similar to the immunization of an organism with a weakened poison or a weakened disease, so that the organism can develop its antibodies. In this case, the lowest strata of society that doesn't read anything else but tabloid papers serve as this sacrificial lamb that is exposed to the dangerous, threatening information. And through many years of such bombardment, they finally learn to live with UFOs visiting us every day, or the government manipulating space, manipulating time, manipulating the genetic code, creating conflicts between humans and animals, between humans and aliens. And in many ways, the science fiction literature has been serving the same purpose. There are so many stories that are written after a carefully orchestrated or designer leak, as I call them sometimes, happens, and some intelligence official contacts his friend who is supposed to be a writer. A nice best-selling story or short story or novel appears on the market after some time. So in this science fiction story, two British constables discovered one night a talking head that was appearing, protruding out of the pavement and smiling and talking to them. A little by little, more and more human appeared out of the pavement, out of very interesting attempt to acquaint the public with the possibility that it is possible to walk through walls, that it is not that difficult and dangerous. And obviously, these are signs that secret programs have been going on behind the scenes. For me, every story that I read in the tabloid papers is an indication that some research of that type is going on somewhere behind the scenes, and somebody is interested in educating the whole society, so that 20 or 50 years later, when this research would be put out in the open, in public, in the academia, there wouldn't be massive panic or suicide. Uh, what other byproducts, I mean, negative byproducts of the Philadelphia experiment would you comment upon, or maybe some of these first nuclear tests that we were talking today that had some very interesting starring effects?
You know, we could go into the nuclear test program, but first I would point out the phenomena which has been discussed and described is certainly not new to this century. Charles Fort, who was an ordinary newspaper reporter a century and a half ago in England, start investigating some of these strange occurrences and reports he heard. Of course, like most other people at the time, was very skeptical. They started clipping these newspaper files, and they wound up with some 50 or 100 shoeboxes full of clippings, which wound up being eventually the property of the Fortean Society. He wrote a series of books, Land of the Damned, and a few others, in which he concluded that basically we might be the property of somebody else. But he documented so many of these strange occurrences, like frogs falling out of the heavens, fish falling out of the heavens on the ground, and other strange falls, even parts of bathrooms, of sinks, and what have you, angel hair, animals, just coming out of nowhere. There has to be an explanation, but none could be found at that time, and the scientists just ignored it. These things have been going on through quite a period of time, and they're not new. But this sort of continues, and then we have the bottom balls, which may have been induced by hardware that we control. Who knows what caused these other phenomena 100 years ago? We came on to the period of the nuclear energy, where we dropped the bombs in Japan. We had atomic tests in the Pacific in 1946-47, which were essentially ordinary atomic bombs. I use the term ordinary advisedly because it kept growing in size and power. But in 1952, with Edward Teller having created it, we were ready to test the first hydrogen bomb. And in 1954, they tested the second one. And what I remember, my dates are correct, is the second test they had an enormous problem with. They decided on a 3-mile-long tunnel to instrument the rate of propagation of the explosion. And Brig kept the instrument with very precise equipment, because EG&G instruments all of these tests has from the year one and still to this day. No one else will or can, because they control the patents. In any case, all of this very nice equipment was built, and measurement equipment, time zero markers, and so forth, and high-speed cameras. So they detonated the device, and as the photos from Life magazine showed, and some of the movie films they showed, a mushroom started to form at the island where the device was in the building, and all of a sudden it was full-blown covered with mold of the island. The measurements down the tunnels they expected would take about 18 microseconds for propagation, if c is the maximum speed of travel of light or anything in this universe, according to Einstein's theory. Well, the bomb went off, and it was T equals 0 everywhere, so there was no propagation rate. It was the end of the 3-mile tunnels that lasted. And this threw all the physicists into a tizzy. out the physics books and say, well, we're back to square one, we start over, and none of the physics we know works or means anything anymore. And of course, one of the other aspects was life somehow got a hold of the photos, and that's a huge, not mushroom cloud, but hemispherical glowing sphere of light with strange patterns in it. He started to rise and thin. The aerial cameras, which were photographing this whole thing, caught some very strange phenomena. And you could see from the camera, and the pictures were published by Life, that through fireball into what was apparently another universe. We were seeing stars. I never forgot that when I saw that one. And it was the issue of Life, and I found out later from channels Life was almost put out of business over that. They were very severely reprimanded. However, they didn't even know how they got a hold of the photos, but they did, and they published it, which I think the public has a right to know, but the military didn't feel the same way about it, particularly the AEC. Right, who cares about the public seems to be the attitude. They never detonated another hydrogen bomb. That's the simple reason. 54 was the last one. They scheduled one for 56, but it was never detonated. They canceled it because it would be an underwater test. They decided, in view of what happened in the 54 test, where not only did they lose the 3-mile tunnels, but the entire island was vaporized, and it went down, burning and boiling down to bedrock, and of course burning and boiling in bedrock for 3 days afterwards, until the ocean water finally damped it out. They started a chain reaction in the rock, by certain scientists are so warned, and others said, oh, this can't possibly happen. And those who poo-pooed it, of course, were those who ran the tests, and they were performed, and they found out it can happen.
They were afraid that the thing would happen that they each night was ready walking the old
They were afraid of this for a simple reason that H2O is the most common substance on Earth, the most common compound, and it's everywhere. And if somehow they were managed to start a chain reaction in the water itself, they would go through the entire oceans everywhere, and that would be essentially the end of the Earth. They did not, fortunately, set off such a reaction, whether it's damped by minerals or whatever else, I don't know, but they were fortunate that that did not happen. So all further tests were banned, and then, of course, the Russians started their H-bomb test. They were afraid of this. Exactly. They had their one and only test, which I believe was about 1959. And they expected, according to the reports which came even from cruise ships, they were about a 30 megaton yield. They got a little bit more. Something they would never admit how much, but it was in excess of 100 megatons. And the Russians said that they never set off another hydrogen bomb again. It was totally out of control, as far as they were concerned. Their mathematical models and predictions, the so-called nuclear theory was a pile of garbage. They don't really know what's going on, and I know personally and physicists published 125 papers. I used to teach at USC Berkeley who said the same thing. He said the nuclear scientists have no idea what's going on. They don't know what's going on in the nuclear processes, period. That's from a nuclear physicist.
famous explosion on an island in the sea. Basically, the North Atlantic ocean. It was so powerful that it broke the needles of the seismograph on the horizon. The earthquake basically was so powerful.
Well, that one I did not hear of. I'm sure you don't hear of everything, and that's why it's necessary for people to get together and compare notes and do networking. Today, the networking via computers is what's getting information around faster than it can be stopped, because you cannot stop the network that the computers are on. It's nationwide. And all of the little computer bulletin boards, which are maintained privately. This kind of information does get out. Back in the 50s, there were no computers, computer networks, it had to be verbal.
You were very interested when you mentioned that there are systems, rumors, and even comments by some major critics of the time included that the two devices that they sold are German.
This was alluded to by a German who was writing or connected with a book that was published in Toronto, Canada, outlining the history of the UFO development in Germany, and also making some passing reference to the nuclear program that Germany had ongoing during World War II. And it was known, it was found out after the war was over, it was known that the Germans had developed and had built a number of atomic bombs which were in their arsenal and apparently never used. And they were working on a super bomb of a totally unknown design, which they were going to plan to use on New York or London, probably maybe London, or New York, whichever they chose to wipe out first, which according to the reports, a single bomb about the size of a pineapple was sufficient to wipe out the entire city, which is to say it was more powerful than the hydrogen bombs which were yet to be invented. But this was known. Very possibly, that's about the only thing they could do. The German technology was so advanced beyond ours, it's unbelievable, and it's unbelievable that they lost the war. They did. And perhaps better for all of us that it did happen. But the technology was very advanced, and they were into these areas. Now, the reports were that this was allegedly admitted by Oppenheimer after the war was over, that the two bombs that he dropped in Japan and Hiroshima and Nagasaki we did not build. Because we had an extreme shortage of plutonium. There was not enough plutonium to cover the head of a pin in May of 1945. And which was when Germany surrendered. It was May of 45. Yeah. And by the time we came around to dropping the bomb in 46, there was a lot of time in between. It's August 45, okay. There was a few months in between, and it was in that interim period they suddenly were able to develop a bomb which was dropped, actually not dropped, tested at Trinity, New Mexico, allegedly the first nuclear device was built. And within a few weeks after that, we dropped two bombs on Japan. The question is quite well asked. If we were so short of nuclear materials, they had enough uranium-235 to build bombs, but those were the huge devices like Fat Man, Fat Boy as they called it, which required a gun barrel to bring the two charges parts together, a howitzer-type barrel, and especially made by the Navy. And it was not a particularly high-yield device. It was rather sloppy, but at least it proves the principle. The question is, did we carry something like that over Japan, or did they drop one of those? And it was later claimed the Nagasaki bomb was actually a plutonium bomb. I can't prove it at this point, but I do know there were enough records in Los Alamos, where I was at the end of the war, to show that the Germans had developed quite a few nuclear devices, and I was not unknown there at that time.
What is your explanation of why?
I would say there is no good explanation unless you totally modify your view of what Hitler's real character was, his real nature of the person. He's been painted, of course, by many news media, continuing to this day, of course, as being a monster, a person without any feeling or heart, who's out to conquer the world. All of the records today show he was not out to conquer the world, and there's the actual military aspects of the weapons developed in Germany are very peculiar. They would not release a weapon into general use in the German military until they had already produced the countermeasures in that weapon. There is no countermeasures of any type on the release that were known at that time or now. That is, after the bomb is triggered and set off, there is no countermeasures. The only countermeasure is that you don't set it off. It may have been for that reason that Hitler refused to use it. As this is speculation, of course, at this point. If he had it and he was losing the war, why didn't he use it as a military weapon? He many times ignored the advice of his own military high staff because he got into the area of the Aryan racial considerations, the racial superiority, and when the British were on the beach at Dunkirk waiting to be evacuated back to England after they were driven into the sea, the German High Command wanted to kill all of the British because, after all, there were soldiers and there was a war on, and it's about 500,000 were prime targets, and legitimate targets in terms of war to be eliminated. They could eliminate any army in the field. Hitler interceded and says, no, you will not attack them, you will let them escape. They're Aryans, you don't kill Aryans. That was his thinking at the time. The British survived, of course, and some Australians and others with them. The end result, of course, they lived to come back to Europe another day, which of course did happen. But he had some very peculiar philosophies, and among them was he did not want to wipe out unnecessarily a lot of Aryans, which he considered the British as being. So one has to take another look, no matter how difficult it may be, at some of Hitler's philosophy and find out where his head really has, because he will not get through current propaganda or the ongoing propaganda for the end of World War II or during World War II. Much of the propaganda that was against Hitler from our side after we were in the war, of course, portrayed him as a beast. But remember two things. Hitler never had a bodyguard. He had military around him, but he never carried bodyguards around with him like every president in the United States has, particularly in the last two administrations. And number two, when he went anywhere in Germany, the children all ran up to him. They actually loved him. And children have a way of knowing psychically when somebody is evil. They didn't shun him, and they ran up to him on a regular basis. You cannot stage manage this all the time. You can stage manage it perhaps a good part of the time. But all of the newsreels are there, testimony. He went all over Germany, sometimes very much alone, without bodyguards with hiking them out alone. If that man was so evil and so hated, why did the German people not attack him?
Father of the nation.
True, and he was, in one case, Hitler, he was considered not only the Führer, the leader, he was considered in many respects the father of the new nation, the Third Reich, and that he had made many promises, and he kept them all. Namely, guns and butter, he pulled the nation out of poverty, and then rebuilt the nation. He did all of these things, regardless of how he did them, he did them. And regardless of the concentration camps, the people who were dissidents, he did reunify Germany and keep his promises. And he also kept another basic promise, which was the reason why he achieved power in the first place, was he promised to throw all the Bolsheviks and all of the communists out of Germany, and he did. They were threatening to take over Germany in 1928-29. It was a very serious movement, communist movement in Germany at that time before he acceded to full power. He was in semi-full power from 1930 on, running the Reichstag, and he became that part I would know.
Another whole story.
That's right.
Other than the Bulgarians were I would like to comment to give any information about particular extraterrestrial races over in Europe. I've heard about transconference in India or elsewhere in the Soviet Union. I heard about some races coming and getting
Well, there's a great deal of information, and Billy Myers is a source of quite a bit of it, that the Pleiadians approached Hitler, a specific group of Pleiadians, approached Hitler in 1933-34, and eventually, after first approaching the U.S. and being rejected by Roosevelt, they went to Germany to deal with Hitler, to provide him with technology and help build up the nation. And their price and requirement was that he would take a very easy stand and no rough stuff in handling the Jewish problem, which is something I know you have. He says there will be no rough stuff. And Hitler in that day really agreed to it, because history shows that in the period up through 1940-41, there was no rough treatment of Jewish and other dissidents in the concentration camps. In fact, they were treated quite well.
and there were plans to repatriate all of
But it's funny trying to hack me on these demons. Well, hacking this time, so.
How they handled it, I don't know. But about 3 days later, they fired up the equipment to see if there's anything wrong with it. They found nothing wrong with it, whatever. Every piece of equipment on that base operated properly, but nobody was there. So ITT shut it down and did a head scratching. Finally says, okay, we don't have any more to do with this place, get rid of it. So that was when the order came to sell it. They found somebody who was a developer of industrial properties and brought it lock, stock, and barrel for $5 million cash. Finally found out how much they paid for it. And ITT told them everything. He says, we don't want all this transmitting here. He says, you got it all. We don't want it. It's your problem. So that's where it came the famous offer to the radio amateurs to come in and have at it and take anything they wanted. So they did for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And then, of course, eventually it was torn up and transmitters were destroyed. The buildings were leveled. I was there when they were doing it. And the underground facilities, there were some extensive underground rooms. They were so strong that they supported the bulldozers without benching at all. What they did with that, I don't know. But they eventually cleared everything. It's now a large industrial site. There's no trace of the old transmitters, towers, the buildings were destroyed. That story was weird in that whatever was going on at that station, or something connected with it wasn't about to be shut down. So into the blue went about 12 people, somewhat reminiscent of what happened at Montauk not too long before, except there was a different phenomenon. So that's some of the strange things that have turned up in Long Island in the process.
The additional byproducts of the adult technology way back in the 40s when semen was disappearing off the deck of the elders, and then somebody else appeared another semen then the room fight, yes, human that came out of nowhere.
Yeah, those are all interesting stories. The one about the barroom fight is documented. I do have the newspaper clipping finally, which documents a group of sailors coming out as they put in the paper the rear room of the barroom, fighting and engaging in a brawl and involved themselves with the customers in the bar, and bar stools were overturned and things were damaged. The estimated $600 worth of damage, which is quite a lot of damage in 1943. And the MPs and the SPs were called, and the police and the shore patrol had along the sailors. And the Navy said they would repair and pay for the damage that was done. The only problem with the story was there was no back room at the bar. There was nothing but a wall. It would appear that these sailors came out of the wall, probably connected with the Philadelphia experiment. I don't really know. It's never been put down for the ultimate answer as to where they came from. The other story I've heard once, and I've not been able to get any data on it, is that about the same time, a sailor, an American, turned up buried in the brick wall someplace in Italy. Quite dead was discovered. The body was half buried in the brick itself. And this was very reminiscent of what happened on the other. The four was caught as very spear, two horizontally on the deck, two vertically on the bolts of the wall. So the phenomenon that was created by the Philadelphia experiment was enormous. It was very far-reaching and was very, very destructive of many things. And we perhaps do not yet know the full story of what it really did. But we do know that the Navy, of course, wouldn't leave it alone. Eventually had to pick it up again in 47, which I've already outlined. But these
story that I heard on American radio, American Forces Radio in Japan in the late 70s about a big rock that was a program on unexplained phenomena, phenomenon. One night, a big rock, huge boulder appeared out of nowhere in the middle of the city square of an American city on the East Coast. Next morning, all the city elders gathered. The rock was so big they couldn't hold it in any truck. They had to cut it to dynamite it. Scientists were called in, and one of them said, "Well, maybe this is a materialization of different dimension." Different dimension. My left foot. That was almost 20 years ago, when I have absolutely no idea about time travel, about different parallel dimensions and so on. Yeah, the 14 phenomena were absolute taboo in Eastern Europe, and still are widely unknown. But the program ended with the words, and the name of this scientist was Albert Einstein, and I clearly remember to this day cold ants crawling down my back because I realized that there may be something more serious to this rather than just a simple joke. Then I remember another story in a science fiction. My personal feeling is that many of the with these messages subscribe to most of the tabloid papers. The Weekly World News is my favorite one. My feeling is that this is a very subtle way of manipulation and of education of the whole society. It works on a principle similar to the immunization of an organism with a weakened poison or a weakened disease.
Oh, you're jacking into my computer. Send me a page. I'm listening to it now. You hack into our main internet, but at least I can hear it play.
So that the organism can develop its antibodies. In this case, the lowest information, and through such bombardment, they finally learn to live with UFOs visiting us every day, or the government manipulating space, manipulating time, manipulating the genetic code, creating hybrids between humans and animals, between humans and aliens. But in many ways, the science fiction literature has been serving the same purpose. There are so many stories that are written after a carefully orchestrated or designed sometimes happens, and some intelligence official contacts his friend who happens to be a writer. Nice best-selling story or short story or novel appears on the book on the market sometimes. So in this sense, two British hospitals discovered one night a talking head that was appearing, protruding out of the pavement and smiling and talking to them. A little more and more, all half bodies and all bodies appeared out of the pavement, out of bricks, out of walls, out of ceilings, out of everywhere. So this is a very interesting attempt to acquaint the public with the possibility that it is possible to walk through walls, that it is not that difficult and dangerous. And this is such secret programs have been going on behind the scenes. For me, every story that I read in the tabloid papers is an indication that some research and some type is going on somewhere behind the scenes, and somebody is interested in educating the whole society, so that 20 or 50 years later, when this research would be put out in the open, in public, in the academia, there wouldn't be massive panic or fear. What other byproducts, negative byproducts of the Philadelphia experiment would you comment upon? Or maybe some of these first nuclear tests that we were talking today that had some very interesting carry effects.
Well, if we go into the nuclear test program, the first one was about the phenomena which has been discussed and described, certainly not new to this century. Charles Ford, who was in a newspaper reporter a century and a half ago in England, started investigating some of these strange occurrences and reports he heard. Started looking into his newspaper files, 50 or 100 shoeboxes full of clippings, which wound up being essentially the property of the 14th Society. He wrote a series of books, Land of the Damned, and a few others, which he concluded that might be the property of somebody else. But he documented many of these strange occurrences, like frogs falling around and other strange falls, even parts of bathrooms, sinks, and what have you, angel hair, animals, just coming out of nowhere. There has to be an explanation. And we found at that time, the scientists ignored it. These things have been going on through quite a period of time, and they're not serious. But this sort of thing continues, and we have borrowed balls which may have been induced by hardware. Who knows what caused these other phenomena 100 years ago? When we came on to the era of the nuclear energy, where we dropped the bombs, we had atomic tests in 1946 and 47, which were essentially ordinary atomic bombs. Use the term ordinary advisedly. Doing the size and power. But in 1952, Teller having created it, they were ready to test the first hydrogen bomb. And in 1954, they tested the second one. What I remember, if my dates are correct, was the second test, they had an enormous problem. They decided to a 3-mile-long tunnel to instrument the rate of propagation of explosion. And the very careful instrument was very precise. The BT&G instruments all of these tests has in year one. Today, no one else will or can because it's so bad. But in any case, all of this very nice equipment was built, measurement equipment, top zero markers, and so forth, high-speed cameras. So they detonated the device, as the photos from Life magazine showed, and some of the movie films have showed. A mushroom started to form at the island where the device was in the building, and then all of a sudden there was a boom. Microseconds for propagation speed